Hi, welcome to Tea Time in Olympia. I'm Lucas Miller, and with me tonight is Karama Blackhorn, academic and career advisor at the Evergreen State College, and a longtime queer activist here in Olympia. Karama, thank you for being with us on the show tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let me see now. I've known you for about 10 years now, I think, something like that.
Probably.
And you've been in Olympia for pretty much
Most
your
of
whole
my
life,
life,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
My adult life.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your experience, your background growing up here in Olympia, a little bit about how you identify and the work you do.
Yeah, sure. Again, my name is Karama Blackhorn, and I identify as a dyke, as queer, as two-spirit, as a poor-ass kid working my way through, as an educated person, as mixed, as Indigenous. And I came to Olympia when I was about 14. I got kicked out of my house for being a big old queer, and as it goes, and spent a lot of time kind of relying on the streets of Olympia, getting a lot of fucking trouble, and that is how I became an activist in Olympia, I guess.
Okay.
But my pronouns are she, CHI, her, and theirs.
Okay.
So I think that's probably, I don't know, a start.
Well, I remember I first met you when you were with Stonewall Youth.
Yeah. Yeah.
So was that a good? Did you find that to be a supportive organization? And when you were young and having that experience of.
Yeah. So I was always getting in fights with like people for saying something racist or being stupid, or was like literally always in some sort of legal trouble, and ended up going to diversion at Community Youth Services, and they let me do community service instead of like jail time.
Right.
And luckily I got to pick where I wanted to go, and that ended up being Stonewall Youth. So it's like a chance to spend I think it was something like 40 hours of community service that I had to do. Yeah. And then to do that, they were like, oh, you have to come to these support groups. And I was kind of avoiding it and doing something somewhere else until somebody at school that we called Big Gay John, who wore rainbows everywhere, drugged me and a whole bunch of other queers there. And there was all these badass dykes that worked there that kind of took me under their wing. And then kind of forced us, that whole cohort. It's a different organization now, I think, than it was back in the early 2000s.
I've certainly seen it go through some changes.
Yeah, it was I feel like it was really radical before in a different way. It was really centered around making sure that we understood race and politics and transphobia, and it was queer activism boot camp, and we had activism summer school and all this kind of stuff, and they just they were young and they were sometimes jerks to us because they were mad and struggling through all these different systems of oppression and shit, but they taught us a lot to think of our identity as our weapon and as our shield. So I don't know, Stonewall Youth definitely was the folks there were the ones who got me off the streets, helped me deal with drug issues, get me into college, kind of turned my life around. So, so it was pretty good.
Yeah. Do you feel like your identity went through, some changes, maybe a process of evolution from that time to until now?
Yeah, I mean, it does for everybody, right? Puberty changes everything.
Yeah.
But I've always I played basketball my whole life, and I was always a tomboy and refused to see myself in any other way. And I'm two-spirit, and my family taught me all these different customs about what that would mean. And so I've always kind of had a different gendered concept, I think. So I've always been in this kind of limbo of gender understandings. but in a good way, like not being stuck to the ways that have been taught. But going to Stonewall made me think about like race in relation to that, and as like a mixed light-skinned person, what does that mean, and what does it mean for solidarity? And so trying to integrate, what does it mean to be poor and coming from a lot of circumstances that are like statistical probabilities for somebody like me, and what does it mean to be that and change systems around me? And I think so a lot of my identity through like a lot of that Stonewall Youth and from other community organizations and just like friends that were badass, that are still organizing in this community and other communities, that just like help me see my queerness as far more complex than who I fuck. Damn, I have to stop cussing.
That's all right.
But just I think a lot of my identity has grown more and more understanding of how it relates to other people, and how being, like, even when I was young, when I was like, 15, 16, I've had this jacket since I was like 17. I've always been like this little kind of scuzzy dyke.
Well, it's a great jacket.
Thanks.
I love the Red Dwarf.
Yeah. But I think being so visible and being so like loud and I can't contain this has been set me in a role where like my identities are community property in a way that is important, that like being visible and mentoring and being accessible for the community and being brave when other people can't afford to be. I think that's where my identity has grown the most. It's like it sucked being what I was when I was younger, but now it's like everything that I am.
It's become a source of power.
Yeah.
Now, you identify as Two-Spirit, and you are part Indigenous, or
I'm fully Indigenous.
fully Indigenous.
But
Okay. So, tell us a little more about your experiences growing up as an Indigenous person, and say a little bit more about that alternative concept of gender that brought to you.
Sure. So, I think something, just like a learning point, I think, is like thinking about racism completely and utterly designs our gender, and colonization completely and utterly designs our genders. And when I say gender, I don't mean our performance, and I don't mean the ways that we perceive ourselves. I mean it more in like, I think in the ways that I've been taught is more in the way of the commitment and role you have for your community. And each of us come with a different kind of spirit and energy that we have to bring to the community, and sometimes we are super limited by the ways that we can perceive that. And we're limited by, masculine or feminine, or going from masculine to feminine, or trying to construct something outside of it, but we only understand how to think in one way, or trying to, So I think...
well, because all of that is culturally determined.
Yeah, and we have a cultural like oppression, right? This like white middle class like kind of oppression of their culture causes all of us to have to think about our gender in this very like screwed up way. And I think a lot of my I don't know if I want per se to go into a lot of depth about how it works, for my culture, but I would say is we can't be liberated, and we can't really like understand cultural diversity and queer cultures without understanding that other people think different ways, and other people perceive different ways. And when we're trying to like be inclusive of like gender non-conforming people or gender queer people, it takes more than just saying that's cool and that's a good way to do it. It takes more of learning like what is cultural oppression done to our people for so long that they have to fight a basic system that constructs our entire economy, our bodies, our sexualities, our roles, and the possibilities that we even get to imagine. But yeah, so I don't know if that answered your question at all.
No, that's great. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on how that has manifested in your personal life, if you want to?
Like, how do you mean?
Like, for example, how has growing up in, Anglo-American culture affected the way you see your body or sexuality or gender, and what has been your response to kind of, I guess, sort of take back maybe the personal autonomy?
Yeah. I mean, I'm mixed, I got a white dad and a Native mom, and I've grown up in like many different cultures, not just in those two, but I think it synergizes each other, right? Like being Kwachi or being like Two-Spirit is one part of my identity, and being a dyke is another part of my identity, being queer is a part of my identity, and rather than letting one be silenced or forgotten, which I think is the end goal of colonization and all these kind of things. Right. It still coexists, because I can't not stop being a dyke, and being a dyke to me is like working class, like woman-loving woman, but also like being, queer as fuck, and being like gender non-conforming, and being like trans-leaning and cis-leaning and Two-Spirit, and all of these things all at once coexist. And I think the older I get and the more I see how each can support each other, and I don't have to be one thing or another, or they don't have to be in opposition. The more whole I can feel, and I think the more I can appreciate my body for exactly what it is, and my spirit especially for exactly what it is, and how it can be healing to me and to other people, is to be able to have this whole like jambalaya of everything all at once. Yeah.
Okay. So you, until very recently, were at South Puget Sound Community College.
Yeah.
And you were
teaching,
what were you?
So I've been working in higher education for about 10 years, doing stuff around equity and diversity and inclusion. And I've worked at the UW and Seattle University, and I worked with high schoolers through Upward Bound, and then I worked at South Puget Sound Community College here in Olympia, and I was the coordinator of diversity and equity there, and that's where Aquarium started, which is, we went to this big queer conference. Can I tell you the story about it?
Yeah,
Sweet, okay. So I went with a whole group of students, and we were mostly gender nonconforming or queer or trans, and we had several trans women with us, and we had to fly to Utah, to Salt Lake City during the Mormon convention.
Oh boy.
It was the worst idea ever. I was so mad the whole time, and I think the students were mad too, because it was like, it was unsafe. The very first thing they did at this conference was make like a whole bunch of like transphobic jokes. And it was just toxic, and it was like, and when they finally got to their content, what they wanted to get into, it was so basic. And we have like a really like intelligent, powerful queer community here. Yeah. So like to bring Olympia people to Salt Lake City and them to be like, this is what LGBTQ is, was a damn waste of our time. Right. And so a lot of the students were leaving, and we're talking about like how complex it is even just to fly or travel, and how complex it is to go anywhere else, and for how much privilege it takes like white cis queers to organize something in an unsafe place and ask people to come, and how much ignorance is there, right? Yeah. So we got really mad, and we started joking about throwing our own conference, and so we just did it. We just said, screw it, like we can do this better, and we can do it more inclusively, we can do it more intentionally, we can make sure that race is at the forefront instead of like this sidekick, we almost forgot situation. And so, which I think is what queerness does. Like, let's be real, like a lot of our queer communities are just like marginalizing any other population because we need to get queer covered first, like, and I think that's what a lot of these conferences do. And a lot of students, like, I'll try not to ramble too much about education and statistics, but like I would say that like, I don't remember exact numbers, but the likelihood of a queer student to graduate right from high school and go to college is pretty small. It's like like a quarter of the amount of like cis straight people, or like half. And for a student of color who is also queer, it is nearly like
It goes down even
yeah,
more.
it's like 33% of queer students, of self-identified queer students of color, don't even finish high school. So when they finally get to college, and there's going to be this kind of shit for them to look forward to.
Yeah.
It's not acceptable.
Yeah.
Like those students have worked so hard to get where they're at. We need to be better prepared for them. And so that was kind of like what a lot of my organizing in higher education became. Like trying to bring together issues of race and queerness in a way that takes up space in education. And brings our communities together to talk about these things. Because a lot of folks who are working on race issues don't want to talk about queerness. A lot of folks who are talking about queerness don't want to talk about race issues.
Right.
And we have to bring our communities together, otherwise our like most beautiful, most powerful parts of our community are going to be lost and excluded.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. But
So addressing that intersectionality was a big part of your work with
Yeah.
diversity and equity.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
guessing.
Because it strengthens all of us, even if you're not queer, it's a part of your culture and your identity. And even if you are queer, it strengthens your identity and culture and your community. So we threw like this big, huge, like 150-person conference with like keynotes, and we spent like a whole year. We brought community stakeholders from all over Olympia, Tacoma, Seattle, to like plan this, and just like we have somehow they gave us the power to plan this. So what could you dream of would be possible? And people just went hard, and they brought all their dreams and their pains and their frustrations and what they're lacking and what they've earned and learned, and like we created something beautiful. We had like 150 people come for the first one, and everything was centered on intersectionality. Everything was centered on liberation and queer culture and taking up space in education. And it woke up the community college system to realizing that we exist.
Yeah.
Because we just didn't exist to them before that. And they maybe would like, there's a few queer people that would bitch about enough that they would remember that we exist, but they didn't want to collect numbers. They didn't want to like think of us as statistically significant.
Right. Yeah.
And then they're like, wait, what do you mean you had 150 of them? We're like, yeah, and we had 150 on a wait list because you were lacking services so bad across the state that we are hungry for this.
Yeah.
And so it kind of like, I feel like it became this policy project instead. When it was supposed to just be like a cultural celebration like Pride.
Yeah.
It ended up being like, how can we advocate for visibility of our people in the communities and education?
I think that happens a lot. You try to you try to create an event that's supposed to be one thing, but then you uncover all these hidden, invisible needs, and you feel like, well, before we can have the celebration, we have to address these basic, because sometimes those needs are about basic survival, and if you're not addressing that, how can people come to the celebration if they're not getting their most basic needs met?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was at both conferences tabling with PFLAG, and
So
I was
good to have
really, really impressed by, the way that issues of gender and sexuality and queerness, were so elegantly interwoven with issues of race and colonialism and all these other parts of the community, because of course queerness of all kinds cuts across every other identity there is, right? So I mean, but I don't think I had ever seen such good coherence in organization as what I saw at the Queer I Am conference, in really bringing those issues together, in a way that people could dig into them and really discuss them. So, kudos to you for that, because I was really impressed by that.
I think it's like because the organizers were really actually diverse, not tokenly diverse. And like we had like folks who were students, who were community members, and majority cutie pop, and I think, or at least POC allies. And I think that changes the conversation, because I have tried to volunteer on so many boards and in so many organizations in this town, and they are white and old. And like, no offense, I know you're on like
Yeah.
every board in town,
Yeah.
but like, you know, as
Yeah.
I get older, it seems
Yeah.
more doable, because I'm like, maybe by the time I'm 40, the boards will be diverse enough, and maybe I'll be
Yeah.
close enough in age.
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah.
you know, as a young person in this community, you try to serve on a board and there's one person who really wants you there and will mentor you, and the rest of the people are like just breaking your heart every time you try to talk. And I think having young people who are people of color organize something completely changes the dialogue, completely changes the ways that you have conversation. And I think the reason it was seamless is because that's seamless for our lives. Like we don't ever, like we can't
Right,
break it
yeah.
down, right?
Yeah,
Like I don't
yeah.
stop being one thing because I'm another thing, unless my community forces me to. And
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah.
that's the real of a lot of queer communities. You have to pick, and a lot of people disengage from queer community because they felt like they had to pick. And so I feel the more I can see like people of color in leadership in our communities,
Yeah.
the more I trust that we'll be doing this better.
Yeah.
Yeah, not to say the aquarium's like perfect anyway, but like I just think like it felt more like spiritually healing in a lot of ways, because like organizers understood what our struggle was, and like what we were really focused on, and like we're able to stick to like race is vital to our conversations the entire time, and accessibility and integrating the voices of students, integrating the voices of the people matters, and we lose sight of that to get things done in a lot of our organizing. And I'd rather not do something than do it wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly know that's an issue that we have struggled with on the Pride Committee,
Right.
you know, for a long time. You know, is how do we make that, you know, a fully inclusive, really welcoming space? You know, how do we center the voices that so seldom get a chance to be heard? You know, how do we, you know, change the culture of our organization, you know, so that, you know, people who are feeling excluded, you know, for whatever reason, you know, come to feel welcome,
Yeah.
you know, and, you know, as an old white guy, you know, this is something that I've struggled with for as long as I've been involved in the queer community, and it's, you know, I don't know if it's going to get resolved anytime soon, but you know.
You know, when I was talking earlier about the Indigenous, or at least my, not the Indigenous, but at least my family's way of thinking of gender being a different mindset than just gender as it is now, I offer that as maybe a analogy for what needs to happen in thinking about how we organize in our communities. And this is, you know, just the way I see it is a lot of people in our community and lots of queer communities, from what I've heard, you know, think that we need to change our organizations to be more inclusive. We need to be more intentional about who we do outreach to. We need to do all these like actions that are going to make it better. And I think the reality is, just like any other system, you can't just make it more inclusive. You need to change the entire damn structure of it. And you need to change the purpose of it. And I think if you say the purpose is a celebration, we need it to be more inclusive, the purpose will not bring you the right people, and it will not be sustained. The purpose should be racial justice, it should be liberation, and it can be done in a form of celebration. And it can be done in a way of, you know, education or whatever it is. But if your core focus isn't actually going to support the needs and histories and reconciliation of our like queer cultural clashes, then it's not going to actually, like, inclusivity is this weird white man term.
Yeah.
It is. It just further supports that, like, this is the norm and we need to find a way to get you to fit into the norm. It's more like
It's like this is
assimilation.
our organization and we're going to open the door and let you in, not
rip the house down and rebuild it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's like kind of like where our community is going, intentionally or unintentionally, is starting to rip down the walls of things and try to rebuild. And I think that's the only way that we're going to actually change. Like what we've been doing a lot of this for so long, like generations and generations and generations, and still white gay men like run the world, and it just, no amount of bringing us in
Right.
will be sustainable.
Yeah.
You know, and it's kind of not quite talking about.
No, well, but I mean, it's, you know, I think it's relevant because it informs the future. You know, if we want to have, you know, a world where everybody, you know, everybody feels like they belong and they have,
Yeah.
you know, a stake. You know, that you're right. We have to make changes at the most basic, fundamental level.
Right.
So there have been 2 or 3 Queer I Am conferences now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will there be future ones, do you think? Or?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I hope so.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
We kept growing and growing and growing, but like most things, we had to fight for every single penny.
Yeah.
We had to, like, all of the policy work that we were doing had to be on us to go out to different schools and do trainings, and luckily we had amazing allies that like helped bring us to their schools to do, like, here's why you need to know that we exist, and here's how you can change some of your, like, you know, stop asking gender forms when you don't need damn gender information, and, you know, like those small things that can make a world difference for us sometimes.
Yeah.
But it was just on the backs of like 3 of us, 4 of us or so, year after year after year, and we would have people come and join in, but it was like a really small group, and for most of us, it wasn't our actual job. It was like
Right.
volunteer time.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, late nights and early mornings and sacrificing other things, and I think
It's a great recipe for burnout, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it wasn't, and it was across the state, you know, and one of our members moved to Oregon, and
Yeah.
2 of us went to grad school. You know, somebody got married, like somebody had their heart broken, like somebody got a new job, like all of us, none of us are like in the same place when we started. And there are so few queer people in higher education that have the skills, abilities, and drive to do this kind of work,
Right.
that it's hard as hell to recruit. And like the people that we can recruit are the people who are most privileged and are like mostly just white women and cis. And while that's amazing that they're willing to do stuff, that defeats the point of what we were trying to organize.
Yeah.
And so I think, I don't know where it's at. I had to take a step back. I have a new job. I've chaired it for 3 years. I'm still in grad school. I'm getting my master's of public administration and tribal governance, which is the but it definitely doesn't lend towards emotional capacity to carry that for this year. But theoretically, we're going to have one in the fall.
Okay.
We'll see. It'll be a surprise
hope.
for everyone.
All right.
I mean, once you do it a couple times, it's formulaic. You can do it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
We tried to make a guide for other schools to be able to do it themselves, because we want it to be accessible for the community so they can do it. And we wanted to set out guidelines that if you want to try to throw queer shit, you need to start doing it with the context of race. You need to start doing it with the context of colonization and of ableism, and like you need to start making sure that you do this right, because we're sick of it being done so wrong. It's so harmful. And when we get our hopes up that we're going to have queer space and queer space ends up being oppressive, it breaks so many hearts.
Yeah.
Yeah. For so many people from so many different backgrounds, it's just not right, you know. And we can do better. We know how to do better.
That sounds, I mean, a guide like that sounds like it could be really, really useful, not just for this conference, but for, you know, queer organizing of all kinds. You know,
hopefully we get it done.
Could really like change the basic culture, you know, of the whole idea. Yeah. But so that's, so that takes us to Evergreen. So tell us a little more about what you're doing these days. You're getting your master's degree?
Yeah. Which is kind of a weird thing. So I've been like kind of talking, can I talk back a little bit?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, so like you said, like we've been around for like 10 years, which I'm still surprised. That's so weird.
Where does the time go?
And I've been all over the place. Like I feel like I'm just a queer, like a career queer, and I'm trying to find a way to get paid to do gay shit and native wherever I can, and somehow education is where it all happens, and it just, like some sort of past life thing pulls me into it, and I just keep coming back to education. But yeah, so I went to Evergreen as an undergraduate, and Loved it. I got to do so much stuff, and I studied critical race and sexuality studies.
Yeah.
So I got to do stuff like take over Jake's after somebody was attacked by a straight guy in the bar, like her and her girlfriend were attacked. And so we took over the streets and like marched through it and got credit for it. It was great. Like just being able to do so much activism all throughout my teen years and with Stonewall and then with Evergreen, and I got to run the Queer Alliance for a long time and just like realize that education is such a liberating place if you are willing to fight and like build community. And so that's why I've just kind of kept doing education. It just, I think for students of color, it gives a great opportunity if there's people there, or it can be toxic. For queer people, it can be toxic unless there's people there, right? Like I think, so it was so good and so toxic being a student. So I just keep coming back, and it's really exciting to be back at Evergreen. And in the first week of being there, we had the day of absence, day of presence. And since then, which is where like, you know, white students leave campus go talk about race and racism and allyship and all these kind of things, and students of color stay on campus and get to talk about like similar issues and cultural empowerment and engagement and going in more depth. And then all of this stuff has been blowing up at Evergreen, where white people felt like they were attacked for being, you know, like it's been so wild. So I've been there for about like a month and a half, and half of it's all been just like madness, and it's great. I love it. Students took over the whole campus, fighting for what they needed to. There was Black and trans students that like are changing this campus to be amazing. So my job is technically to use all my navigational skills I've been developing all these years, and you know, my understanding as much as I can of what it means to like be trying to find a job when you're gonna you know, look like this and like how do you sell yourself, or how do you talk to your professor about their transphobia or those kind of things. So my job is to advise people through that, to mentor them, to communicate with them about skills and tactics, and like when you try to do a phone interview because you know you don't want them to see what you look like until they've already sold, like like those kind of like navigational things that we have to know and we don't always get to learn until it's too late. I get to do those kind of things, which is really fun. But I also get to like be a liaison for the Queer and Trans Center and work with an amazing human that works there, and try to develop like a retention program for queer and trans students, to focus on like academic and career success, and then potentially, hopefully, teach a course in queer history and queer success.
That would be awesome.
And leadership. So that is part of the goal now. But a lot of it is just trying to support the school in its transition, doing what I can to like support, bring my knowledge, because I've worked in equity and diversity for a long time, to try to bring it to the community and bring it whatever direction I can. Support like retention programs, support you know, students and whatever they need so that they can finish their degree and protest the school as long as they need to until it does what they need it to do.
It sounds a little bit like my experiences at the University of Massachusetts. We
Tell me about it.
had a pretty long-standing tradition of student activism around race, around militarism, certainly around queer issues. We used to have a sort of a standing joke that you knew it was spring at UMass when the forsythia bloomed and a group of students took over the administration building.
I love it.
Spring hadn't properly come until that happened. But so tell me more about the retention program and what you actually do to help students stay in and graduate.
Yeah, so a lot of underrepresented students end up struggling through school, not because, they always lean towards saying it's like financial reasons or it's underpreparedness and all this kind of stuff. But there's a lot of underprepared, poor, non-underrepresented students that do just fine. And I think from what my experience as a student and my experience in my research and my 10 years of work has been that it's actually a lot of just not, of the institutions being so under culturally prepared. of either, just straight up ignorance and straight up like microaggressions constantly, and faculty like completely erasing us out of the books, completely intentionally telling us to be silent about our frustrations and our experiences as underrepresented people in education. And as queer people, like, we don't exist in education. So a lot of this, I think a lot of good retention programs like integrate cultural issues, integrate cultural power, and integrate identity, like identity-focused education, so that people can see themselves in education, can learn to understand themselves better, and find strength in their identity and strength in their community, so they can deal with all of the microaggressions and racism and all this other shit that's existing constantly when you're just trying to learn math or writing. So retention programs that I've like been involved with or organized in the past have all been around how can we integrate our culture and our history and our identities into ourselves as students. So this retention program, I think, is going to be looking at how can we develop social justice skills and toolkits and identity awareness, and how can we integrate history, queerness in STEM fields, and queerness in literature, and like these kind of things need to coexist for us to give a damn about it and to try as hard as we want. And learning how to queer a reading, or learning how to understand that they were queer pottery people when you're doing that pottery class. Like small things like that go a long way, you know? And we've been so systemically erased from everything that trying to just wake it back up, I think, and integrate it into your student success plan and how you can be a leader.
To revisibilize.
Exactly, and just like just demand institutions step up their game. And we spend so much time and energy teaching LGBTQ 101 to a whole bunch of ignorant people when we should be teaching our students to become those people that take their jobs. You know? And I think that's the retention program. It's not just retaining them for a year or for a degree. I don't care if somebody gets a degree, honestly. I want somebody to get an education and to get liberated.
That's a very important distinction.
And I think that, so a lot of it's going to be just like workshops on our history and how it relates, and workshops on you, and reframing what success looks like, because success that we've been told is to have a couple babies and a house and like a career that like is always like very white male-ish, you know, and like a lot of our people do that. Assimilation has been powerful, right? Exactly. But we're all gonna fail if that's it, right? Like we're gonna fail so bad. And so many of us that could have been scientists and could have been like teachers, instead we're all just doing cultural studies because there's nowhere else in any of the literature that talks about us. We're so invisible and so cut out from all other education that we are like pigeonholed into social studies. And then we have to do the physical and emotional labor and social work for everybody else in this community. And I think that's why like every single nonprofit is like largely composed of queer and trans people in this community. And in many communities, like you can go to any nonprofit that doesn't pay well and you'll find queers. And I think it's a part of this educational system of erasure that we are so hungry for this, that like the only way to retain us is to get us into like gender studies classes, instead of letting us just like go be a coral reef scientist or something, you know? Like, I don't know. But so the retention program is just like trying to find ways to do that, and then getting on people's butts to remind them to sign up for class, and to have queer people be accessible for them to say like, hey, how do I talk about this issue that they aren't going to tell me how to talk about it, right? Like my teacher keeps dead naming me. Like, how do you talk to somebody like that if you don't know what that even means? And a lot of our school systems never knew what that means, and will probably never care in the way that they need to until we take it over.
What have you found as you work with students to help them navigate all these difficulties? What have you found to be the most successful strategies? What do you find really makes a person want to, stay in and get that education?
A sense of community, a sense of belonging, a sense of duty to peers, a sense of worth, a sense of like you're needed, like you're worthy, you belong here, and even if it's not in your classroom, because you only have so much power of that. It can be in your communities, building up each other, like mentoring each other, and bringing your, I mostly work with like students of color, so bringing some of those experiences that you've learned to navigate with, or even just as queer students, being like, come and teach us about asexuality. Like, we don't know it, like, come tell us about your experience, or come tell us about Samoa, or come tell us about, being raised in foster care. Like, tell us what that looks like, and we will learn our best to be there for you, because that gives us a sense of duty to try to be better for each other. And I think finding like genuinely diverse communities and fostering that, and fostering their ability to be the educators and not just be this like pity game, which I think a lot of people put us at, like being like, this is your shop, you run this, you do this. Like, I think that is the best retention strategy, of like building a family that cares about each other, even if they, fight, like really trying to foster that, like, power differential, right? Like, and I think that's the best way in my mind to do it. So I think retention comes with community. It doesn't necessarily, and a sense of belonging in that community. Even if you have so much difference, it can happen, and it does happen. It just gets erased from my history books too.
Yeah, well, one of the things I found when I was at UMass was that some of the most important education is what takes place outside of the classroom. And it's sometimes the greatest value of a school is that it brings together people who can learn from each other. Not necessarily from the professors, although they can be very valuable, but learn about all the experiences of all the people around you that are so different from your own. But
doing it in a respectful way that isn't just like trying to. I feel like a lot of time the downfall to the education is when it's like a whole bunch of majority population people trying to ask minorities to teach them about their ways, right? Like it needs to be equalized in a better way. And I think education and community organizations have a lot to do to learn how to do that. And it comes back to that like thing about like our organizations, like we need to stop being inclusive. Inclusive isn't the answer. It's like saying ending bullying in schools is going to end oppression. It's not. It's just a systematic, or just like a symptomatic like Band-Aid situation. I don't know.
So, what changes do you feel you've seen, in the last 10 years, going from being, with Stonewall Youth to where you are now? What do you see as having been the biggest changes, good or bad, that you've seen here in the local community in that time?
I feel like there's a lot less changes than I wish I had seen. I think things come in ebb and flows. I think.
Well, and of course, the flip side of the question is, what do you think still needs to happen?
God, yeah, now that you ask it, like, I just don't think that much has changed in 10 years. Not necessarily all good or bad.
Well, it's not a very long time.
And it's been, I think perceptions of queer people have changed in the last 10 years drastically. I feel like we're a legalized entity now, whereas before,
for good or ill.
I feel like there's like 3 major perceptions, and some of these are newer. And it's like we are either perverted, sex-crazed deviants, right? Or we're...
If we're lucky.
Yeah, right? I know. I wish... Okay, that's what I think is... Okay, that's what's changed in the last 10 years. The queer movement's been desexualized.
Yes.
It is so damn, like...
I think that's been going on for actually quite a lot longer than 10 years.
From like even just when I was like 15, pride and queerness and everything was sexy. It was sexy to be queer. And now it's like I don't know, it's like a giant placenta or something. Like it's just like we gave birth to something sexy. Now there's this thing that like probably has nutrients, but I don't necessarily want to take it home.
Yeah.
Like it's like queerness has
can I
become
tell the
sterilized.
Pride Committee you said so?
Yes, yeah. Tell the Pride Committee that the Pride
Yeah.
Committee is this one giant placenta. I don't even know,
Yes.
but that's how it feels.
No,
It's
well,
like so desexualized. And like
Yeah.
even I remember at Pride last year, I took off my shirt. And somebody freaked out on me. Like somebody was uncomfortable with me taking off my shirt. I'm a goddamn dyke and it's Pride. I'm allowed to be ass naked and you're supposed to clap. Like that's what's supposed to happen. Don't tell me to like censor my body. Like we fight so hard all year long to just be ourselves that we should be able to celebrate our sexuality. And I want some more spankings in the street, and I want some more like leather daddies at every event.
Exactly. I miss
like,
the guys in the buttless leather chaps.
Yeah,
you know?
drag queens aren't even allowed to cuss anymore or like grind anymore.
Yeah.
You know, like come on. I think that's the biggest that's changed. Queerness is desexualized.
Yeah.
And it sucks.
Well, I'll tell you,
sucks.
one of the biggest criticisms we got last year afterwards was that the committee's emphasis on having what we call a family-friendly event, it was felt that really translated into suppressing the voices of youth, removing, what the celebration of sexuality that Pride was originally meant to be. That it was kind of a code phrase for,
we're doing this for straight people?
For silencing marginalized voices in a lot of ways. Particularly youth and
Yeah, because usually when you're trying to make something family friendly too, you're not even just trying to make it family friendly, because we're all family. You're trying to make it middle class white friendly.
Well, exactly.
Like
and I mean,
that's it's not just code. Like that really is the family friendly image of like it's and I know that we're supposed to like try to make straight cis people like us more, but I really think at this point there's so many of us that we could just win without them.
Yeah, and even straight middle class cis white people know that you don't have a family without sex.
Yeah,
I mean,
but they want to pretend they don't. I mean, like that's why we're
yeah,
oppressed peoples. And if we keep catering to people who've been oppressing us, then we ain't gonna get nowhere.
And of course, that's a very deep, very old problem with white culture.
Yes.
Is that erotophobia,
And we stop catering to family. And I know that we have a lot of parents, and I know that we have a lot of families, and I think that we do need space to celebrate that, and we do need space to do that. But I think we also don't need to have that at the expense of the rest of us. Because a lot of folks who are living in, and I don't mean to overgeneralize, but I feel like just due to economic and cultural things, a lot of people who are living those lives of parents and families and like kind of having that immersive experience that are afraid of queers wandering with no shirt, they're living a very different life than what we need to live. So like what my experience of queerness is very different than the mom who's afraid of me. And I think if we keep centering the people with the most privilege in our communities, we're never going to get anywhere. And that's why nothing's changed except for the desexualization. We got to bring the sexy back.
Do you see any positive trends, or, is there anything that?
I think a lot of like my generation is starting to come up and find their voices, and not necessarily, I wouldn't say that we're getting any room in older organizations in the way that I wish we did, but I am glad to see that I think we're doing a lot more inclusivity in other communities. So I think, a lot of issues around like homelessness are full of like queer consciousness. Issues around food insecurity is queer conscious. And I think because of the exclusion of queer communities historically, of other marginalized people, we're doing a great job everywhere else and like really doing that work. And I think I've seen that like going to the food bank and having a bunch of queer people work there and like be really conscious about things and like just like the holistic picture has gotten a lot more immersed, and I think there's a lot more powerful leaders that are rising, and I'm so excited to see what it's gonna look like when I'm like your age sitting on a board, like and it's gonna be amazing. It's gonna be like just, I don't know. So I think there's a lot of growth and I think there's a lot of activism that our elders have designed for us to be able to do it. And I think we're carrying the torch just like we should. And I think we're pushing each other to grow more, and not as much progress has been made as should. But I think our conversations are getting more common, and our conversations are getting more amicable. And I think like conversations like this are becoming more of a norm rather than a radical act. And I think that's important. And I think that means that we have something going forward.
Good. What's next for you? You know.
I don't know. Yeah. I've been doing a lot of stuff specifically around hoping to do more and more stuff specifically around like Indigenous education and Native students, and like decolonizing gender and those kind of things. And I think because I'm in grad school, I think that a lot of my energy is focused there right now.
Okay.
So I think what's next for me is just trying to figure out what my next role is in the community and being called to something new, and continuing to fight for educational equity and continuing to fight in every corner that I can get called to. But I have no idea, and I'm really excited.
Yeah. Good. So is there any particular message you'd like to leave our viewers with?
I feel like I want a Mr. Rogers cardigan situation. I don't know. I would say probably just from what I've seen be the most powerful situations in organizing is the moment when somebody just tries to do exactly what they care about in exactly the way they care about doing it, without thinking that there's a right way or a wrong way or a right kind of person to be, and just bravely doing whatever they can to be themselves as loud and as powerful as they can. I think we need more people who aren't supposed to be there in that way, like those riffraffs, those like adorable perverts, those
Troublemakers?
Like troublemakers. We need so many more troublemakers, so come and be troublemakers. I think that would be my message is you don't have to blend in, even though I think queerness tells us that we have to now, in a lot of ways, in that dominant way. You have to be fully you and bring all of you and find what that means. And it's okay to take breaks, and it's okay to dip out, and it's okay to come back. I think that's all I got. And go to college.
Okay.
Get your damn degree.
Well, Karama Blackhorn, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Yeah.
And thank you for joining us on Tea Time.
We at Tea Time in Olympia are proud to announce that our show was nominated for and has won the Association for Community Media's 2017 Jewel Ryan White Award for Cultural Diversity. The Jewel Ryan White Award is given annually to those whose efforts encourage involvement with community media by culturally diverse or underserved populations. We would also like to thank Andrea Kapir as well as Thurston Community Media for nominating us and as well congratulate Andrea Kapir for her award. She won the 2017 Emerging Leader Award, which recognizes a community media professional under 40 years of age who demonstrates leadership in the field on a local, regional, or national level. We would also like to congratulate Freddie Dobler, Peter Epperson, and the summer class of 2016 as well for winning an award for their production, Let's Talk Trash, a video produced by the TC Media Young Producers Network, which won Best Magazine Program in the Student Division in the Hometown Media Awards. And as well, we would like to thank all those who have volunteered their time, expertise, knowledge to come be on the show, work behind the scenes, crew, and mentor us as we produced our shows, as well as all our viewers and local community members who have watched our show and contacted us with offers to be on the show, as well as to offer support and positive feedback. Lastly and always, we would like to thank Thurston Community Media, whose skilled professional staff have gone above and beyond to help not just us, but every member achieve their goals and have their voices heard.